Tonight's performance, Storytime, coincides with the publication of Bill T. Jones's new book, Storytime, The Life of an Idea. And the performance and the book are a conversation and a questioning of the ideas and methods of John Cage, about which you will hear more. I want to give special thanks to the Center for the Art of Performance at UCLA, to the staff there, the marvelous performers, and the creative team from the Bill T. Jones, Arnie Zane and company, who are here from very snowy New York. After a brief pause after the performance, we will redress the stage, and then Kristy Edmunds from the Center for the Art of Performance will be joining Bill on stage for a conversation. We'll open to you for questions, and after that, Bill will be signing copies of his book in the lobby. Now, please join me in welcoming Bill T. Jones.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you very much for coming out tonight. It's it's really wonderful to be here. As you heard, there is a lot of snow in New York, but I think we all got out in time for our performances tomorrow. You want to play a little conceptual warm-up game with me? You don't have to do anything except do very little. I'm going to ask our production stage manager, Carly Manning, to give us a go, and when she does, when you feel that 1 minute has lapsed, raise your hand. Don't look at your watch. Hold it there, be brave, okay? 1 minute. Carly tells us to go, and you hold your hand, okay? Should we try it? Hold it up. There's always a pioneer, right? 1 minute. Hold it up, hold it up. You're a leader. How do we all live in the same planet, huh? There you have it. Okay. Yes. So, as you know, John Cage was really very, very interested in time, and I am very interested in John Cage because he seems so exotic to my temperament and my way of making art. So, about 4 years ago, and asking myself yet again, where did I want to go with my art? I thought, I'm interested in writing, and I'm interested in something about what performance is, and time is a part of that. Tonight, what you'll see, well, let me say, in 1958, John Cage did a very, very important work called Indeterminacy. He wrote 90 stories and read 90 stories in 90 minutes. He read the stories, if they were 20 words, he read them in 1 minute. If they were 220, he read them in 1 minute. It was a musical problem for him. I have taken this as a kind of an encouragement and a provocation. John Cage was a very different man temperamentally, obviously racially, and his time was different than mine. So I've written my own stories. To date, I've written about 181 of them, or collated 181. And now you will be hearing about 25 in a 30-minute version of a work that's usually 70 minutes. You'll be danced by Erick Montes and Talli Jackson. The choreography comes from 3 very important duets that were made by my deceased partner, Arnie Zane. They're Monkey Run Road, Blaudot Mountain, and Valley Cottage. Both the stories and the fragments of choreography are arranged by random procedure. We go to random.org, and random.org tells us the shape of tonight's performance. So, without further ado, let's jump right into this excerpt from Storytime. Monkey Run Road is an hour-long duet choreographed in 1978-79. We had been working with videotape made around that time to set the dance on present members of the company. Talli and Erick were doing a run of it. At the moment when they are head-to-head like two cats or dogs doing a back-and-forth sort of crawl right at the front of the playing area, I was struck by a tattoo on Erick's right forearm. The tattoo in and of itself is nothing out of the ordinary. On the contrary, such tattoos are everywhere on people's bodies, on young people's bodies in particular. Restaging the work demands a constant referral back to the grainy image of the young Arnie Zane and me in performance 33 years ago. Erick's tattooed body performing the material shows nothing more than the obvious. Personal style changes, bodies do not. Prepped for a routine procedure with needles in both arms, one a hydrating drip and the other for the anesthesia, I was wheeled through several fluorescent rooms, looking at the various ceiling treatments, lights, and alarms, listening to my driver, the anesthesiologist, a pleasant man, trade banter with his colleagues before we arrived in the room where the doctor greeted me. The drug for my, quote, lovely sleep was administered. Everything had been successful to this moment, but something like fear insinuated itself. I was going to go unconscious, to be blacked out. What if I died? How would I know I'd ever been alive? There was a peculiar taste in the back of my throat, just as the anesthesiologist had said there would be. Did I yawn, as he predicted? My eyes reluctantly opened. I was back in bay number 6. The brown beige wheat field curtain was closed. I knew the answer, but asked nonetheless, is it over? I wanted my lovely sleep to not be over for a while, maybe forever. Arnie Zane was a great lover of Luz Nevelson's work. We were living in San Francisco in early 73 or 74 when she came to town with a much-publicized show at the San Francisco Museum of Art. Determined to photograph Nevelson, Arnie took the day off from his job as a clerk in the water department and somehow, by calling the airport's baggage claim, learned where Nevelson was staying. He then called the Stanhope Hotel on Nob Hill saying that he was from baggage claim at the airport and asked to be connected with Miss Nevelson's room. Her gallerist answered. Arnie introduced himself as a photographer and somehow got permission to meet with Miss Nevelson with the caveat that he bring a portfolio of his work. When Arnie arrived at the sumptuous suite, he showed his work to the gallerist, who then took the portfolio into Miss Nevelson's bedroom while Arnie waited the verdict. She came out in headscarf and full makeup, wearing a sexy silk slip and ballet slippers, all charm, ready to go to work. They headed to the hotel's room to take photos. It was the end of a festive lunch, full of stories, wine, and good food. I was talking with my friend Peter, and he was saying how moved he had been to see a short documentary about my work on television. He loved seeing the dancing, but the footage of Arnie and me performing a study for Valley Cottage some 30-plus years ago disturbed him. When I asked Peter why, he said uncomfortably, I wish I had been there. I wish I had seen you guys then. Why did it have to look so old? I had not spoken to Lily Mae since her husband Harris, my eldest brother, died a few years before. I was calling to locate family photos of the 60s, 50s, and 40s for various documentary projects. Lily Mae was very warm. She told me he had hidden the photographs as his Alzheimer's progressed, and though she had looked for them after his death, she had no idea where they could be. She spoke of her initial skepticism at the idea that there was anything wrong with his mind. That changed the day he walked out of the house, waving his children away dismissively as they called him asking where he was going. He grew ever more fearful, often hiding outside in the bushes. He became violent, striking her in the face once as she asked him to sit down for lunch. She was obliged to hide all knives and an old shotgun he would sit out front holding. When the end came, though he barely recognized her, he tried to hold her hand, only able to grasp 2 fingers. She quietly encouraged him to let go. She knew he had passed when he released her hand and was still. Whenever we visited Los Angeles, we stayed in the guest room of Betty Freeman's home in Beverly Hills. In it was a big, comfortable bed jutting out of a corner. An arrow-shaped Dan Flavin sculpture hung over the bed. The light from the sculpture was impossible to bear at any time, especially when trying to sleep, as it was a garish shade of red. I never asked Betty about her decision to place such a comfortable bed under an uncomfortable light. After she died, I read in an auction catalog that Dan Flavin had dedicated that work to a friend who had been killed in an ambush in Vietnam. It was sundown in the summer of 1972, and Arnie Zane and I were standing, hitchhiking in the New York State Thruway, trying to get a ride home to Brockport from Buffalo. The state troopers had already threatened arrest if they caught us standing where we were. We had retreated up the ramp, but decided to risk going back as night was falling. For the week prior, we had been at New Brindaban, the Krishna consciousness retreat in West Virginia, chanting and praying from before dawn till late into the night. The rhythmic clanging of cymbals, pounding of drums, and ecstatic shouts of Govinda Jaya Jaya Gopala Jaya Jaya. Govinda Jaya Jaya Gopala Jaya Jaya was still ringing in my ears, mixed with the whoosh and roar of 16-wheelers, family cars, and buses. We were very small, very high, and very alert as the stars came out. Lois Welk tells this story. Lois had just finished her studio practice and was lying on the floor breathing, music playing. She is alone. She hears the door open a crack and turns her head right, a face she hasn't seen before. He starts to say he can come back later. She says, "No, I'm finished. Come on in." She's thinking, great, we need male dancers in the Brockport Dance Department. Many years later, I send her a gallery of my book, Last Night on Earth. She gets to the part where we meet for the first time. Lois is surprised to read that in my mind, at that same moment, was my mother's advice. Don't get caught in a room alone with a white woman. During a snowstorm, Cecil Taylor, Arnie Zane, and I stepped into the Blue Note, shaking off the snow in the uncanny stillness of 6th Avenue. Cecil introduced us to an array of personalities, some well-known, all lovers of jazz, and Abby Lincoln in particular, who sat quietly at the bar in between sets. This was the treat Cecil had promised us earlier that evening. We had met at the insistence of Max Roach, who envisaged a collaboration between Cecil, himself, and the two of us for the Brooklyn Academy of Music's brand new Next Wave Festival. Meeting with Cecil, he had quickly dismissed Max as that, quote, old bebop drummer, and passionately insisted we consider Abby Lincoln instead, as he was more than intrigued by her style and, quote, this thing she does, past words, past singing. He kept repeating, man, it's a sound she makes, a sound. The Taos Pueblo, at 1,000 years old, is considered the oldest inhabited site in North America. It stands at the foot of the sacred mountain of the Taos Indians. On this mountain is the Blue Lake. Legend has it that once 2 serpents arose from the bottom of the lake, circled each other, then swam in opposite directions, one to the dry river of the Taos River and the other to the Pueblo River. As the serpents approached the mouths of both rivers, The ground cracked open, waters gushed out, and continue to flow to this day. It was the summer of 1974 in Binghamton. I moved in a fog of guilt and uncertainty, convinced that the only reliable life for me would be monastic. I was practicing yoga and chanting Hare Krishna daily. A guru had to be the solution after all. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. Alone, down on my knees, performing my job at the university library, a voice said, "I have been looking for you." I looked up into the face of a handsome East Indian man beaming down at me. I was thunderstruck. Actually, he had been looking for a space to conduct his meditation classes, and someone must have told him I was a member of a dance collective with a loft in downtown Binghamton. I became one of his students, a vegetarian, and proposed celibacy to Arnie. One Saturday morning at a street fair, I bumped into Mirza, my teacher, eating a hot dog and strolling with his wife. I was shaken, though nothing was said then or later. He did teach me a number of mind-focusing exercises. We saw less and less of one another, and then he moved away. It was March. A light snow was falling. Uzuyuki, the Japanese call it. And though I was grateful for the heartbreaking beauty of snow on weighted bamboo, the lattice work of budding trees and the frosted granite boulders, I fell into comparing this March evening with that evening 24 years ago when it was warmer. Forsythias were in bloom everywhere, as the neighborhood seemed to be holding its breath and Arnie Zane was dying upstairs in the bedroom. That would always be March. Though it didn't happen often, one of my favorite memories is of Merce Cunningham telling stories. We were sitting in his kitchen one evening before going to dinner. Merce told of having watched a cat, was it his cat, fall 6 stories, land on its feet, crouch still for a moment to absorb the shock, and then Merce, with his hands and arms, demonstrated the cat carefully shaking out its legs, taking a couple of tentative steps, and walking away. Betty Freeman invited John Cage to a performance of my dance company at the Joyce Theater. On the program was a duet called Shared Distance and Fever Swamp, a 6-person piece to the music of Peter Gordon. Fever Swamp was like Peter's music, apparent and available, barely 10 minutes long, with a sure climax at the end that audiences enjoyed. Shared Distance was practically in silence. Its structure was cyclical and repetitive. The silence was punctuated by footfalls and breath, recurring collapses, and moments of tenderness. John was kindly circumspect about the entire evening. With that squinted-eyed, fully committed smile, he said, "I was interested in the duet." It was as if it never needed to stop. It might go on forever. The phone woke Lois Welk up. It was Arnie. She's in Corning, he's in Valley Cottage. Lois, I think I'm going to die tonight. Is Bill there? Yes, but I don't want to wake him up. Arnie, you need to call 911 and get an ambulance to take you to the hospital. I'm sorry. Do you want to go to the hospital? Yes. Lois waited for the sky to get lighter. This is before cell phones, so once she hit the road for New York, she was incommunicado for 4.5 hours. Bumper-to-bumper traffic going into Manhattan. Tears were streaming down her face. She was sure that he would be gone when she got there. Upon arrival, Arnie is somehow revived and holding court with a small entourage. Arnie suggests we all go to the Quilted Giraffe, his treat. Afterward, she drove him back to Valley Cottage, luxuriating in having him next to her. I was aware of the banging radiators and the traffic outside the Duke Studios on 42nd Street as a run-through of continuous replay began. I heard the peculiar clench-jaw sound of the gesture called Little Indonesian Metal Horse through at least 3 rounds of the accumulation, but looking up from my keyboard, I realized it was impossible to watch the dance unfold as I was typing. There were already 4 dancers stretching into what Arnie Zane called Isadora. The percussion of the pipes was consistent, but was it interesting? Was I interested? Time passed. John Oswald's sped-up version of Rite of Spring. The percussion of the heating became regular, like music. 3 men were upside down. 4 dancers lunged off. The pipes went silent. Oswald's electronic take on Beethoven. The dancers were now downstage, close to me as I was typing. I tried to write and watch. The dance was coming to a close. I was missing it. They finished. In 1980, we created Blauvelt Mountain, a work in 2 halves. The first was titled A Fiction, and the second, An Interview. In A Fiction, we were dressed in dark colors, performing an accumulated sequence of rolls, lifts, stop action, punctuated by hand claps and sotto voce speaking. Bill Katz had designed a wall made of 151 or so cinder blocks. It was a low wall that ran all along the back. In An Interview, we were in white doing 2 separate activities, never touching, sometimes singing, to a repeating, ever more fragmented recorded dialogue. We had placed locks under the chairs in the audience, set to go off after 25 minutes. I was to dance throughout the stage, to the audience, out to the lobby and back, while Arnie, wearing a pair of workman's gloves, disassembled the wall, rebuilding it again at a right angle down the center of the stage. We were invited to perform the piece at the Akademie der Kunst in Berlin. On the morning of our first performance, we looked at each other and with disbelief said, "We're going to build a wall in Berlin?" Max Roach told of the day when Abbey Lincoln and he were excitedly putting the finishing touches on a Thelonious Monk tune, to which Abbey had written lyrics. They were excited because Monk himself was to come by. He came. Listened intently to their performance, whispered something into Abby's ear, and then left. Max asked Abby what Monk had said. And here, Max, doing a perfect imitation of Monk's curiously gruff, gravelly speech, whispered, "Next time, make a mistake."
Ta. 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 Ta.
As Arnie set up his camera to photograph Louise Nevelson on the roof of the Stanhope Hotel in San Francisco in 73 or 74, they chatted. Nevelson was in her late 50s, wearing her signature floor-length paisley coat with chinchilla lining, a headscarf, 3 sets of false eyelashes, and a jockey's cap. "What do you do other than photos?" she asked. "I'm a dancer," he said. "Fantastic. Every artist must dance. Now, shall we begin?" She hawked up a wad of phlegm, spat it out, and then, like a fashion model, pulled the fur around her and stared directly into the camera's lens. In the fall of 1989, I mentioned to Virgil Thompson that I was going to spend New Year's in Venice. My first visit there, he said, "Venice? It's wonderful, but you must never go alone. It's too tragic." Lois Welk was on the way to New York City. The train suddenly stopped. An announcement. "We have struck someone on the tracks. They are no longer with us. We are waiting for the police." She sat quietly and surrounded herself with a cloak of solemn respect. They were transferred to another train, one by one, directed to step down on the ground, don't take a big step from one train to the other train. If you touch both trains at the same time, you can get electrocuted. Lois was already touching both trains. She obediently stepped down to the ground and let them help her up the high metal step into the parallel train. On their way again, she picked up her smartphone to see if there was a report on what had happened. One person wrote in an online conversation, "Can you imagine going to work, doing your job, accidentally killing someone and having to live with that? The tracks are down. The train can't turn." It was a Saturday morning in 1972. I had left Arnie relaxing in a patch of sunlight on the front stoop of our tenement, dressed in pink pedal pushers and a polka-dotted peasant blouse. His thick, dark hair was free and luxurious. I returned a few hours later. His outfit, like the demeanor, had become darkly masculine. His hair was pulled severely back. "What happened?" I asked. It seems that a car full of young men had started harassing him. Arnie had picked up a large, heavy metal drawer from a pile of junk and hurled it across a lane of traffic, damaging their car. The driver screamed that he was going to get the police. Arnie dashed upstairs to adjust his appearance. Before long, the damaged car appeared, followed by a police vehicle. As the young driver opened his mouth, Arnie announced, "Officer, I would like to file charges against these young men." The young driver's eyes bulged. As he stammered, the policeman ordered him to shut up, get back in the car, and show his license. The cop turned to Arnie saying, "I'm so sorry, sir. It's a shame, but these young people, the parents are the problem." I stood with Arnie in the summer night, the sound of cymbals, drums, and chanting in my head, risking arrest as we were not allowed to hitchhike on the New York Thruway. The police could return at any moment, and yet we stood there, fingering our japa beads and chanting, "Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Ram, Hare Hare." Suddenly I said, "Quick, they're coming." We ran back up the ramp as a police car I couldn't have seen pulled up to where we had just been standing. I have never experienced the future so clearly before or since. In 1973, on a beautiful early summer afternoon in Brockport, New York, Arnie and I were walking down Park Street, not too far from the house we were renting. There was a baseball game about to begin in the park nearby. Many cars were cruising past as we walked. One car slowed, and the driver, looking at Arnie, shouted, "Faggot!" Arnie cursed at him as I began to kick the fender. The driver snarled at Arnie, saying, "Go suck your nigger." before speeding off. As we waited for John Cage to join us before dinner, Merce Cunningham told Betty, Arnie, and me of the time Danilova and Anton Dolan performed a new pas de deux that they had barely rehearsed. Was it for a gala performance? Afterwards, Danilova said impatiently to Dolan, Anton, I know you don't know the steps, but at least you could have danced them better. Just after dark, pianist Cecil Taylor, Arnie Zane, and I were walking literally in the middle of 6th Avenue. A winter storm had shut down traffic, and neither sidewalk nor street had been cleared. Minus the traffic noise, with even our footfalls muffled in the now delicate, unremitting snowfall, we might have been on a sound stage. As is his way, Cecil was talking freely about any number of things. The New York School of Composers came up, John Cage in particular. Cecil said, I know all those cats, and I can dig what they're going after, but I have to say, he paused, it's not very much fun. Growing up in the country gave one many opportunities to be alone. One summer afternoon, aged 9 years or so, I lay in a gully along the back of the house trying to scroll through my future life in 10-year increments. From 9 to 19, from 19 to 29, from 29 to 39, 39 to 49, and then it became really hard. Gretchen Bender once said to me that some of us have nostalgia for the future. It was the summer of 1981 or so, and I was performing a solo on a makeshift stage as part of a day-long arts festival in Milwaukee. My friend Renata Sack had driven from Waterloo, Iowa, to see me and join her good friend Ruth Gao, just recently returned from China. That afternoon, I went shopping with the two of them in a vast vintage clothing warehouse. At one point, they were suggesting shirts that would suit me, Ruth held to my chest a 50s era shirt in red and gold, asking how I liked it. I said with some scorn, "I'm not into nostalgia." She answered, "You will be."
Well, chance procedure.
Yeah, chance procedure.
Bill
I just
got
got
locked out
locked
of the
out. I couldn't
dressing
come back through
room,
this way.
so he came down and surprised you. My name's Kristy Edmunds, and I'm the director of the Center for the Art of Performance. I'm also somebody who has had the great, deep honor of working with Bill T in the past when I was running the Melbourne International Arts Festival. So I just wanted to quickly, I'm not going to talk a lot. We're going to set things going, and then I'll start turning to all of you with questions. And before I get going, how many of you feel like you have something arising in your mind? Okay, I'll be relying on you later. Okay? So Bill, you had spoken earlier when the performance was just beginning. You mentioned that chance procedure. You talked about that and utilized it in the... And it's interesting, having also worked with Merce a lot, and not Cage, but knowing very intimately how much he had developed it. What caused you to start being allured to it?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's possible to be a contemporary dance choreographer after Merce in 1954, whenever he started using it, and not be affected by it. We used to always look for things to happen in the studio. That, and so it was always a tool, but I don't think it was until I had just done a series of highly ambitious works that were trying to craft text and all sorts of different things together. And then when they're over, you know, the response is what it is, and then you feel a little empty and wonder, why do another work? And I think that that's one thing that John Cage gave to us. He says, well, maybe you should take away some of those questions for yourself. You don't have to have the answer for them. Right. Why don't you give an outside agency? And I think Storytime came from that desire to get back down to the business of writing and thinking and feeling, and at the same time doing what my brilliant associate artistic director, Janet Wong, does with me, and that is, how do we keep our wonderful group of dancers alive and learning and material? How do we bring the past and the future together? I think that's why it sort of happened when it did.
One of the things also for the audience who may not experience a lot of contemporary dance, and I just wanted to, what was remarkable for me watching them is you are going through a variety of text and stories verbally, which is its own dance.
Yes.
You know, in its pacing, its time, its delivery, and that kind of thing. But the content of it is also moving through time, back and forth in time, across different points in time, which you do spatially a lot in your choreographies as well. The dancers are dealing, I think, also with their own, not narrative, it's not a narrative story, but the physical vocabularies of the literacy in their bodies, right? And dance is often transmitted not from a direct emulation. It's really these different vocabularies, influences, the physical variety of different choreographers they've worked with. So the extraordinary intelligence of history through their bodies in the movement sequences and the choreographies by Arnie, as well as yours. Actually, we were witnessing a vast sort of speed through of knowledge, which was astonishing. I mean, I could read it through many different levels. But one of the things I wanted to, you know, Bill has made so many major works. But you choreographically, and I was thinking about this as well in the using of the chants, there's something that runs underneath a lot of your work that seems to have something to do with trust, right?
It's funny, yeah. It's funny you should say that, because today started with a conversation with somebody, about middle age being a bitch because
Yeah.
the world seems to be shifting and you don't trust everything that took you from A to B is not guaranteed to take you from B to C.
Right.
And that are issues of the heart, issues of the mind, conceptual ideas,
Yeah.
political ideas. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah, so trust is there. Maybe trust and the lack of trust.
Well, trusting that some impetus or stimulus will cause, after the emptying out of a work, a replenishment is
Yes.
a major amount of trust that artists undertake. And then there's the trusting of yourself to engage in this little item here.
Yes.
I was so thrilled when I saw the book, when I knew you were doing the book, but when I saw the book itself. Rarely do we have, I mean, if it's true that history tends to see what was put in print, then the artists who work in our most ephemeral form, dance, have a very difficult time with what history will see, right? Really, I mean, often performers and audiences, even like tonight, you become the permanent collection and the archive of this particular experience in this way, and how you possess it is, you know, a form of a different kind of archiving and your own kind of trust. Rarely do we have an opportunity for our major artists in live performance practice, and dance in particular, to write. So thankfully there's video and a variety of other things. But nonetheless, history doesn't see an archive often of a bunch of videotapes that go into something, but they do see something about this. So what's interesting to me about it was, not interesting, something that was generous about it, is that you said yes. You said yes to the idea of finding a way, not identifying as an author, to accept the potential, the opportunity, the potential, to embed a performative intelligence into an object,
Yes.
right?
With the help
And-
of a collaborative team.
Exactly. But how many of you have seen the book or read it, or just so I can get a sense? Okay, you're going to be doing all that later, except for Ken, of course, Ken. So tell me about your process with this book.
Well, I was invited by the African American Center at Princeton and the Toni Morrison Lecture Series to do a series of lectures, one a week for 3 weeks. And part of the agreement was the lectures would be done and then they would be made into a document. So it wasn't that I was dying to do a book, although I'm really grateful for it. And when I could do it about anything I wanted to do, and I know that I had been working on story time, and I had all this growing list of stories at that time. So one thing that was very attractive was, how do I get it published? Oh, here's an opportunity to just publish the stories. But there were those lectures. So the first one, which is called Pastime. The second one was a performance, not unlike what you saw here tonight, but there was no dancing, and it was my companion and the creative director of my company, Bjorn Ameland, was drawing on a board. This was in Princeton in one of their classroom lecture halls, very full of atmosphere. The third section is called With Time. So I tried to make 3 different experiences, one of which, true to who I am, was going to actually be a performance. That is, in fact, the lecture. And the last 2, the first and the last, would be talking about how I was introduced to Cage, what Cage meant to a person of my description in the early 70s when I was first introduced, and all the ramifications of a certain type of art making and attitudes about art. Story time, as we mentioned. And then there was the last one, With Time, and I was asking, how has the idea weathered? His idea of indeterminacy, I think, it's just a part of us now. And so it's in good shape. How has it weathered in me?
Right.
And so that's how the book came about, and that's what I was fortunate enough to be able to put down in writing. And I say it was a team because Fred Appel, who is the editor at the Princeton University Press, he and I developed a very lively discussion back and forth. And there was a wonderful Maria Lindenfelder, I believe that's her name. I hope I get it right. She's the designer of it. And one thing I have to realize is that I'm comfortable speaking. It's part of my DNA. It's part of my tradition. But I was very wary of something that Skip Gates, Henry Louis Gates, head of the African American Studies Department at Harvard, said, "Black oration is dead on the page." Black oration is dead on the page. What the hell?
Yeah.
But you know what? It's probably right. You got to be there. You have to, and can you look at that speech, pick it up, and feel it? Black orators, or particularly when we're really let go, it's about that moment. It's about singing. So what Fred did was there was a speech, but he would make me, well, what are you actually getting at here? And when you're doing a speech, you can just like say something and let it hang, and the audience does the rest of it. So he and I had a little fight about that. I was saying, you're making me flesh out something that should be left indeterminate. But you said you're writing a book, and people have not, unlike you, have not had any sense of what the performance is like. And maybe people don't know who John Cage is. Maybe they don't know about you. Maybe they don't know about your tradition. And so it was. He was actually very good for me in a way. Very good for me.
Right.
Yeah.
And you say in the early on in the book that it's because it does have a performative strategy inside of it, I think, where you do let things trail, but not in a way that causes anyone to stop.
Yes.
Right. But you say that you felt conflicted.
Yes. The document. I say the document is conflicted.
Yes.
It is an artifact, and yet it is an artifact of performance attempting to be a book. And that's okay with me, actually. The thing that you're holding in your hands in the preface, I think it's the preface introduction, is conflicted. And that's a pretty honest way of looking at how I feel being in the world, actually. Yeah.
I want to make sure we're going to have time for some questions. Are they starting to percolate up? Okay, let me move you a little bit differently. I want someone to talk a little bit about the experience they had in watching this dance and choreography. Not a monumental monologue about the experience, out of respect, but some essentialness, something, a word or an essential. Please.
When you choreograph, at what point do you think about, I know this one was appropriately two men, but when do you think about a woman's body versus a man's body through space and time? When do you identify that this should be a female dancer or a male dancer?
We've gone through a lot of changes. There's a thing called contact improvisation. Yeah. Are you familiar with it? And contact improvisation was greatly democratizing of dance, in the sense that the paradigm of classical pas de deux is that the woman becomes an idea, a sylph, a thing, and the man is invisible, and that she does these things. So if you find a system that allows the small person to lift the big person, already you're on your way to something else. Now, I'm 6'1". Arnie Zane was like Erick's height, 5'4". So we had a kind of a thing going on there, and he was very adamant that he did not want to be in a subservient position. So we had to get rid of that ballet paradigm. Now, when we were working at the Dance Asylum, Lois Welk was our lead teacher, very robust, and not a traditional dancer at all. Jill Becker, the women were really wild. And Arnie and I, we all worked together, but he and I were companions, lovers. So there was always a special place. Now, when we had our own company, the question was, I really wanted them to be as fierce as possible, because Arnie said that he took lead. He said he didn't really want to. He really disliked ballet pas de deux, partnering. His take, and I think it might have been unfairly, was a lot of homosexual men lifting heterosexual women around the stage. And he said, and you know, I don't know, you can't read. I read around that time in the late 70s, Jacques D'Amboise saying that people wouldn't believe it, but in the ballet world, there were 60% of the men on stage are heterosexual. And therefore, this wasn't fair. But that's what our take on it, at least Arnie's was. So our company was going to be an image of the world that we want to live in and not the world that we live in. Now, your question is very peculiar because you want to take it to talk about issues of woman's body. My dancers in my company right now, they're not subjected to the same doctrinaire attitude I had when Arnie died. Yeah. The women were expected to, everyone did push-ups. Yeah. Everybody was supposed to be interested in this weight sharing and lifting. Lo and behold, by the time we roll into the late 80s, 90s, there were women who were not interested, actually. Vive la différence. You know, I'm not really interested in picking up your big ass. You know?
Or your socks, or
your socks, right. You know what I mean? So I'm trying to understand where we're at right now. And as you know, right now, first of all these were made between 1979 and 1982. It was a different world. Yeah. But as you know, that there is now the polarity. This is what I'm learning, and I guess you're learning it too. We're in a brave new world now in terms of gender identification. I have to be reminded regularly, it's not men and women and gay and straight. There is a whole panoply going on between the two. So now that being said, how do you rephrase your question? In other words, I don't have a transgender person in my company. I'm looking out for them. How do I find them? And how do you, in an audition, wanted male dancers, female dancers, how do I say wanted dancer? You know, I don't know. So how do you rephrase your question?
I just think it's interesting that I think bodies move differently, and you have in your mind how you'd like to see the dancer move. Mm-hmm. And then in that thought of how I'd like to see the dancer move, do they become a gender to you in your mind?
Well, you know, Terry Gross, on NPR, great interviewer, she asked me that question once. Well, so tell me, are there masculine movements and female movements? Now,
have you seen Terry?
Pardon? Oh, I have not, actually. But traditionally it was understood that and we go to the ballet, right, that the petit allegro, those things that take delicacy and filigree, or the épaulement, all those things were in the realm of the female. Balanchine has even said ballet is woman. The men were supposed to be, you know, in the class, and now we're going to do the big jumps. And the men, they slow the tempo down, and now the big jumps. Suzanne Farrow liked to take class with the men because she wanted to do the big jumps. So that's a classic paradigm of a female area and a male area. Now we know that, first of all, in the modern dance world, those things don't matter, because God knows I wish I had more people who had the facility of that in their feet. But everyone now is expected to be able to do everything. Yeah. But not everything. I mean, some partnering, why strain with certain things? And Bill, if you want to talk about harmony and a loving relationship, does it have to be still the way you and Arnie used to do it, with the struggling and the lifting, you know? Mm-hmm. What do you know about the way people really have sex? What do you know about the way people really love? What is intimacy? Mm-hmm. What does intimacy look like on the stage? And that's been a journey, and women have helped me understand that. Mm-hmm. And I have to get out of the way, you know? I have to get out of the way, and because I don't know everything about the human experience, and yet on stage, you'd like to be potentially expressing it all. So I'm still learning.
One of the things as well is, when we think of John Cage and what he had he contributed, which was vast and a lot,
It really-
obviously.
yes.
I'm going to show you actually his rehearsal studio when you're here tomorrow. But before he moved to New York, one of the things about him too is that he did something that was, I think, in hindsight and current, and definitely current when he was working, was cracking open a certain kind of, untrodden upon field of snow. He moved in directions that opened pathways and gave permission to leap towards them, interrogate them artistically, compositionally, musically. Bill's companies have also done that very thing. You have done that very thing. One of the things, if you don't know the history of his company, he and Arnie, the body types inside of the dancing bodies was infinitely radical, in which dancers of extraordinary scale and size, weight differentials, there's no utopian body in multiple stages of your dance company. And I think it's very important. A lot of women, tiny little women, teeny tiny, tall, all kinds. So we're very mixed. So I loved when you had said that earlier. It was
Well,
like
thank you for that. But you know what? We never had. We really never developed a lasting relationship with a person with disability,
Right.
or whatever the correct way of,
Yeah.
so a person. We never, because of
Yeah.
the business of the dance, the way we understood it,
Right.
we never had found the right person who could be one of those persons. Yes, we had Larry Goldhuber at 300 pounds.
Sure.
Right.
And Heidi Latsky.
Yeah,
and-
Heidi Latsky and so
Yeah.
on. But we never made that, like I'm saying right now,
Sure.
transgender people.
Yeah, right.
You know?
Sure, sure.
I'm open to it.
Yeah.
It's about the personality as well,
Right.
and does the work suit them?
And the push-ups.
We don't have to do the push-ups anymore. We don't have to do the push-ups anymore, you know?
Who's thinking, please, up in the back here.
I found myself struck at the beginning by a tension between wanting to listen to your words and wanting to watch the dancers, and the beauty of each of them was pulling me in opposite directions. And I'm just curious if you could talk about your intention there, and then also talk about your process of writing and how that's different or similar from your process of choreographing, even though I know this is Arnie's choreography, but just in general.
Well, you know, I was really trying to use John Cage as a mentor. And, you know, there's a very famous Cunningham piece where he reads his indeterminacy piece, stories, and Merck's company dances. And, you know, when I think back, and I've seen that piece twice, I can't remember his stories. I remember the presence of he and David Vaughan, but I was so like watching Merck. So I feel that I hope that by the end of the half an hour, because you know the piece is 70 minutes long, something begins to happen. I know when I watch it, I'm really uncomfortable the first 10 or 15 minutes. Then after a while, I stop trying to control it. And sometimes it's about the story, sometimes it's about the movement, and sometimes there's these kind of happy or maybe kind of odd and unsettling occurrences, these things that happen. Like, what about the story? Faggot! What happened there? What happened there? What happened for you? Where were you at that moment? What were you watching? What were you listening to?
I was listening, and then I looked for their response in movement at that exact moment. But I think you're absolutely right. That was my experience of it. Eventually, I just let go and didn't worry about that my mind or spirit wasn't large enough for the work, and just
Or that you were missing something, right?
Yeah.
And you know, see, he I think John Cage is so fantastic because it's a terrifying amount of freedom that he gives to you, the creator, and you, the audience. And you know, this is something I talk about in the book, which I didn't know before I started researching it, that Cage had this notion of 3 tiers of composition, because you realize he was a composer, not a choreographer. The first most important thing was the composition, what the artist was doing, and what the artist was doing for himself. The only reason to make something was the artist is finding out something for himself. The second was what he called the execution. And as you know, he had famous fights with when he tried to go into symphony orchestras and so on like that, with the way people, they didn't take him seriously, what the freedom he gave and so on. So he had his own feelings about that, but he wanted the work to get out there. And the third, he thought, was the experience of the audience. So I think he had a very, very tough, and I dare say perverse take on the theatrical experience. He's not there to take you on a journey. You don't start with the theme and then he takes you back home or what have you.
Yeah.
Wasn't interested in that. And that little bit of the story, the one where Betty brought into my performance, I was interested in the duet. It was as if it never needed to stop. It could go on forever. There was something very subtle and sly he was saying to me at that moment about my desire to be theatrical and dramatic and to move you, to get to control the way you feel. Well, at least that's what he said. But I know that he was an artist, and most artists I know, performing artists, want to be embraced. God knows John Cage and Merce know what it's like to empty an auditorium. No.
For decades.
For decades. For decades. That's what we were taught. Those were the big boys.
Yeah.
You want to play with the big boys? Then you got to get rid of this idea of them people loving you. They will come to you. And, they're right in a way. John Cage is still out there. I mean, most people, he doesn't get programmed. But Merce is now a god. Merce is a god. Yeah. So, but am I playing that game? Am I going to make you come to me? No, I am a very ambitious motherfucker. And I want to win. Not always proud of it, but I want to win. And what is winning? Well, we can talk about that.
Yeah.
How you get the rent paid. How do the dancers have health insurance? How does Kristy book me again?
Yeah.
And that's a whole science, isn't it? So, shall we move on? Yes, right.
But, one of the things, too, is that, and it's an important distinction in entertainment and performance, and a lot of time dance falls in this place where people move towards it feeling as though the virtuosity of what will take place will be entertaining. And you, in a way, when it's an art choreography and an art dance, as an audience member, have to find those points. Because I'm asked this all the time. The artists who work in entertainment modes often are seeking, or entertainment unto itself, are seeking that we all have and arrive at the exact same place at the same time, emotionally, right? The outcome is known, and it is then dressed with creativity and opportunity towards repetition, to hit that note, to hit that leg movement, to hit that thing every single time.
It's a product.
It's a known outcome. All things are delivering towards it. And if an artist knows the outcome that they are going to get, they stop making right there. That the pursuit of the unknown outcome is the endeavor. And in doing so, you author and gift our ability to find the value proposition inside of that work.
That's such a generous thing to say to artists. Do you feel like most artists actually aspire? That it's about discovery?
I notice that they'll have
I know for me it is.
Yeah. Artists, real, true artists will. In fact, when often an artist is making something, and this is one of the deep, to me, betrayals of grant applications, is that it asks you to identify the end point before you've begun. And it's already vulnerable enough to have a doodle on a napkin, right? So if you have to prove, as an artist, the idea, its end game, its outcome, in order to seek the resource capacities that might allow you to explore and experiment towards your hunch, your intuitive obsession, something. Most artists, if they have to already know the outcome, don't want to invest the labor of the creative self towards it. So a grant application often is the death of an art form, even though it's seeking to empower it because of this problem of sequencing.
No, this is we could be.
Yeah, I can
stuck.
just tell him, like, I'm going to get the ding-dong here. and he's like,
But the only thing I have to say this is that I think what you have said has been the thing that drove, that many of us came into this field for, and I should say that art is a spiritual activity, and art is not a vocation, it is an avocation, it's a calling. All that sounds good, except now we live in a time, and I am trying to get this, I say it all the time, but my companion, Bjorn, is trying, I want to do a TED Talk. I want to challenge something I'm saying all the time. Arts are as important as highways and hospitals. Okay, well, hold on. Oprah, the spirit of Oprah is in the room. I know. But I think it's something else I'm trying to say is I don't know if I believe it anymore. I don't know, because you're talking. There is if there's a hospital, I want the best doctors there, and I want it when I want it. If the bridge is there, I want that bridge to be there. Now, what do I owe the grant writers? What do I owe the discourse? Should I know how to encourage people to come in and then, quote, instruct them, enrich them? There are the poor people. When they come in there, they want to be entertained. That's what they want. They need to see Swan Lake. They need to see that leg go up. I know they do. It's frustration for us that we've been trying for so many years, but okay, do you know better than they about what they need? So maybe if you want those dollars, and we need those dollars, you got to put out. You say arts are as important as highways and hospitals?
God knows you do.
Well, show me. Show me then that there's important. I don't know what it means. I'm not sure. Well, then wait, next. Somebody who knows what it means, get up here and let's talk, right?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
That's the time we live in right now, and I'm sure you see it very up close. Fundraising.
Yeah, no, it's
the foundations, the corporations.
Sure.
What do they want? What do I do? I can't rob them. How do I get them to fund me? I'm going to guarantee that this work is going to change things. And somebody says, I've had people say, I don't want it to land in a culture. I want it to land in my community. I want to be making work for people who think like I do. Now, so that's a very personal choice. I would like it to have the biggest possible audience, but I want to do it as much as possible on my terms. What I worry about, now here's an old, I worry about the very young. And that's, that's another discussion. Your parents,
It's another.
That's another discussion. Yeah.
But there is one thing for sure, that when each of us, in one way or another, receive a work of art, whether it be ephemeral or an object, there is something that person has done. You can only have an aesthetic. We can have intellectual experiences like crazy. We can have emotional experiences like crazy. We can throw ourselves into deep dysfunction at any moment and spin all kinds of emotional experiences and then think about it together later. But an aesthetic experience tends to hit us in a different way. And it's the kind of experience that only hits us in that way because of the endeavor of an artist. And in that endeavor, there is for sure something that artists are seeking to do with that proposition or possibility that will go in, and that is to help us stay awake to the world. So here is one such man and one such artist who will be outside signing books. Thank you, Bill T. Jones. Thank you, library.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it's such liberty.
Get married.